the golden cage, the Manhattan. Skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dominic Foster's penthouse office. At 42, he was the undisputed king of architectural innovation, the visionary behind Foster Designs, whose buildings reshaped skylines across 3 continents. Tonight, like most nights, he remained hunched over his drafting table long after his team had departed. Lost in the precision of his latest concept, a sustainable skyscraper for Singapore that would cement his legacy forever. His phone buzzed again. The third call from home in an hour? Dominic glanced at the screen displaying Sophia and silenced it without answering. Their anniversary dinner could wait. Its project Compsing's 7 miles away, Sophia Foster sat alone at a candlelit table. In their Gramercy Park brownstone, the chef she'd hired had already packed the untouched meal into containers. The vintage Bordeaux bottle they'd promised to open on their 10th anniversary remained uncorked beside a single wilting rose. At 39, Sophia's quiet elegance hadn't faded. But the hope in her eyes had dimmed with each passing year of their marriage. "He's not coming, is he?" asked Meredith, their housekeeper of 8 years, who had stayed late to help with what was supposed to be a celebration. "There's an emergency with the Singapore project," Sophia replied, the excuse so familiar it required no confirmation. She managed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You should go home to your family. Alone." Sophia wandered through the immaculate home Dominic had designed for them. Masterpiece of light and space that had been featured in architectural magazines worldwide. Every angle was perfect. Every material exquisite. It was, by all measures, a dream home. And yet it had never truly felt like one. In their bedroom, she opened the drawer of her nightstand and pulled out a small leather journal. Inside were watercolor sketches of the modest cottage they'd once dreamed of building together in Vermont. Back when Dominic was a promising graduate student and she was finishing her doctorate in art history, back when they'd talk until dawn, about creating spaces that nurtured the soul, not just impressed the eye. "We'll build something small, but meaningful," he'd promised. "A place that grows with us, with our children." Children, another dream deferred until Dominic's career stabilized. Then until after his first major commission, then his first international project, then his first award. Now, at 39, Sophia had quietly accepted that their family would consist of just the 2 of them, when Dominic was actually home. At midnight, headlights swept across the bedroom wall as Dominic's car pulled into the driveway. Sophia quickly wiped her tears and replaced the journal. By the time he entered, she was seated at her vanity, removing her earrings, the ones he'd given her years ago but wouldn't recognize now. "The Singapore client loved the preliminary designs," Dominic announced, loosening his tie as he walked in. His handsome face, though showing signs of exhaustion, was animated with the rush of professional victory. "We're moving forward with the full proposal." He paused, noticing her dress. "Did you go somewhere tonight?" "It was our anniversary, Dominic." Silence that followed was deafening. His face fell as realization dawned. "Sophia, I don't apologize," she said quietly. "We both know you don't mean it. That's not fair. This project is the biggest opportunity of my career, they all are." Sophia stood, her composure intact, despite the fracture spreading through her heart. "Every project for the past decade has been the biggest opportunity of your career." Dominic ran his hands through his salt and pepper hair. "You know how important this is? Once this is done, there will be another," she finished for him. "There's always another." As she moved past him toward the bathroom, Dominic caught her wrist. For a moment, they stood suspended in the tension between them. His eyes searched hers for the adoration that had always been his anchor. Instead, he found something that terrified him more than any failed project could: indifference. "I'll make it up to you," he promised, the words hollow from repetition. Sophia gently removed his hand. "No, Dominic, I don't think you will." That night, they slept on opposite sides of their king-sized bed, separated by an ocean of unspoken regrets and the blueprints of a Singapore skyscraper spread between them another monument to Dominic's ambition and another nail in the coffin of their marriage. Fractured foundations, the morning sunlight filtered through the custom-designed skylights of the Foster residence, casting geometric patterns across the marble kitchen floor. Sophia sipped her tea, watching a beam of light slowly crawl across. The counter she'd selected from an Italian quarry 3 years ago, like everything in their home, was perfect and utterly cold. It had been 2 weeks since their forgotten anniversary. Dominic had compensated in his typical fashion, an extravagant emerald necklace delivered by courier, not by him. A reservation at La Bernardine, which he canceled at the last minute due to a conference call with Dubai, and promises of a weekend getaway indefinitely postponed. The routine was so familiar that Sophia couldn't even summon disappointment anymore. Mrs. Foster. Meredith appeared in the doorway. The gallery called. "They need your decision on the installation layout by noon." Sophia nodded. At least she had the gallery, a small contemporary art space in Chelsea she'd opened 3 years ago after Dominic had encouraged her to find a project to occupy her time. What had begun as a distraction had become her sanctuary, the only place where her voice mattered. "Tell them I'll be there in an hour," Sophia replied, rising from her seat. As she gathered her portfolio, her phone buzzed with a text from Dominic. "Late. Meeting tonight. Don't wait up." She didn't bother replying at the gallery. Sophia immersed herself in the upcoming exhibition featuring emerging female sculptors, artists whose work explored themes of constraint and liberation. As she positioned the pieces, her assistant Julian watched her with concern. "You're quieter than usual," he observed, handing her a measuring tape. "Everything okay?" Sophia offered a practiced smile, just focused. "Right," Julian said, unconvinced. "And that's why you've moved that same sculpture 4 times?" She paused, realizing he was right. The bronze piece, a woman emerging from a geometric cage, kept drawing her back. "It needs to breathe," she said finally. "We're suffocating where I've placed it." Julian studied her for a moment. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "the art isn't what needs repositioning." His words lingered as Sophia worked through the afternoon. When she finally locked up the gallery at dusk, instead of heading home, she found herself walking to Washington Square Park. There, amid the bustle of students and street musicians, she sat on a bench and opened her journal, sketching the people around her, their connections, their laughter, their simple joy in each other's company. A young couple caught her attention. The way they leaned into one another as if magnetized, how they shared a pretzel, laughing at the mess of salt on their clothes. They couldn't have been more than 25, probably NYU students with nothing but student debt and ambition. Yet they possessed something that had vanished from her own life. Presence. When was the last time Dominic had truly been present with her? Not just physically in the same room, but mentally and emotionally attuned to her. She couldn't remember. As twilight descended, Sophia's phone buzzed again. A text from Meredith. "Mr. Foster called. He's bringing clients home for dinner in an hour. Asked if you could be there." Not a request from Dominic himself. Not even a direct call. It's just an expectation transmitted through their housekeeper. The final crack in an already fractured foundation. With sudden clarity, Sophia made a decision. She texted Meredith back. "Please tell him I have plans tonight. The caterer's number is on the fridge." Then she called Julian. "Remember that artist? Residency in Florence you told me about? Is the application deadline passed?" "It's tomorrow," Julian replied, surprise evident in his voice. "Why? Don't tell me the great Sophia Foster is finally considering something for herself." "Maybe I am," she said, feeling a strange lightness in her chest. "Can you send me the details?" That night, while Dominic entertained clients in their showcase dining room, Sophia sat cross-legged on the floor of her private studio at the back of the house, completing the application. For 3 hours, she poured her soul onto the digital forms, attaching images of work she'd created in secret over the years. Intimate sculptures and paintings that expressed what she could never say aloud. When she heard the front door close around midnight, signaling the departure of Dominic's guests, she didn't emerge. Instead, she hit submit on the application, then opened her email to compose another message, this one to Patricia Hernandez, the family attorney who had drafted their prenuptial agreement 11 years ago. Dominic found her there an hour later, surrounded by sketches and clay models. His irritation at her absence during dinner had faded to curiosity. "What are you working on so intently?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe, jacket discarded and sleeves rolled up. In this light, with his guard down, he almost resembled the man she'd fallen in love with. Sophia looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time in months. His eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion, new lines etched around his mouth. Success had taken its toll on him too, just in different ways. "I'm building something new," she answered truthfully. "A new installation for the gallery?" "No," she said. Standing to face him, a new life. Dominic's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "What does that mean?" "It means I've applied for an artist residency in Florence. 6 months away from New York. Away from this." She gestured to the space between them. 6 months? He stepped into the room, disbelief coloring his features. "You can't just leave for 6 months. What about the gallery? What about us?" "Gallery has Julian and us." Sophia's voice remained steady despite the trembling in her hands. "There hasn't been an us for a long time, Dominic." "That's not true," he protested, but the uncertainty in his eyes betrayed him. "We're just going through a busy period. We've been going through a busy period for 7 years, she said. "I can't do it anymore." "So you're running away to Italy? That's your solution?" "I'm not running away," Sophia replied. "I'm running toward something I've lost sight of myself." Dominic stared at her, suddenly seeing the stranger. His wife had become the quiet, supportive presence he'd taken for granted, had transformed into someone with firm boundaries and clear eyes. "And if I asked you to stay?" he finally said. "I'd ask you why," she countered. "Why now, when I'm finally putting myself first? Why not during any of the 1,000 nights I spent alone? Why not when I told you I was drowning in this beautiful prison you built for us?" The silence between them expanded, filled with the weight of unspoken truths. "I'll be leaving next week," Sophia said softly. "And Dominic, I've asked Patricia to prepare separation papers. They'll be ready before I go." As she walked past him toward their bedroom, where she would sleep alone in the guest room for the 7th consecutive night, Dominic remained frozen in her studio, surrounded by the artistic expressions of his wife's loneliness. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't racing with architectural challenges or client demands. Instead, it echoed with a single, devastating realization. He had designed masterpieces for the world while neglecting to maintain the foundation of his own home, and now that foundation had finally crumbled. Blueprints of Redemption, the Florence confirmation email, sat unopened in Sophia's inbox as the autumn rain pelted the windows of their brownstone. 3 days had passed since she'd told Dominic about the residency and the separation papers. 3 days of strained silence and careful avoidance, like two ghosts haunting the same elegant mausoleum. Dominic hadn't argued, hadn't pleaded. His silence was more unsettling than any confrontation would have been. He simply retreated further into work, leaving before dawn and returning well past midnight. But on the 4th morning, Sophia woke to find him sitting at the edge of their bed, still in yesterday's clothes, his expression haggard. "Did you mean it?" he asked, his voice rough from exhaustion. "About the separation." Sophia sat up, pulling the duvet around her shoulders. "Yes," he nodded slowly, as if absorbing a particularly difficult architectural constraint. "I have a meeting with the Singapore investors today, the final presentation. After that, ... he hesitated. "After that, can we talk? Really talk?" Okay, she agreed, not knowing what else to say. Dominic reached out as if to touch her face, then stopped himself and stood. "I'll be home by 7. But 7 o'clock came and went, then 8. By 9, Sophia had changed out of the dress she'd put on, returning to comfortable leggings and an oversized sweater. She'd prepared what to say, how to explain that this wasn't an impulsive decision, but the culmination of years of neglect. Now, as she sat alone in their living room with a glass of untouched wine, bitter laughter escaped her. Even for this, their potential ending, he couldn't show up on time. At 9:43 p.m., her phone rang. Not Dominic, but an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Foster?" a clinical voice asked. "This is Mount Sinai Hospital. Your husband has been admitted following a collapse during a business meeting. The world tilted on its axis. When Sophia arrived at the hospital, she was directed to a private room where Dominic lay connected to monitoring equipment. His normally commanding presence diminished against the sterile white sheets. The doctor, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, met her in the hallway. Acute exhaustion, complicated by severe dehydration and dangerously high blood pressure, she explained. Has your husband been under unusual stress? Sophia almost laughed. Stress was Dominic's natural habitat, his chosen element. He's always under stress, she replied. But lately, yes, more than usual. Well, his body has officially revolted, the doctor said firmly. He needs rest, real rest, not just a weekend off. I've recommended a minimum 4-week medical leave, and I've made it clear that ignoring this advice could lead to a stroke or heart attack next time. For weeks, the irony wasn't lost on Sophia. For years, she'd begged for just a few days of his undivided attention. Now his body had demanded an entire month. Inside the room, Dominic's eyes fluttered open when she approached. The Singapore presentation, he murmured. They'll have to manage without you, Sophia replied, adjusting his blanket reflexively. No, you don't understand. He tried to sit up. I walked out in the middle of it. I just left them there. Sophia stared at him in disbelief. Dominic Foster, who had once conducted a video conference from their honeymoon suite while she slept alone, had abandoned the biggest presentation of his career. Why? She asked. His eyes met hers, clear despite the medication, because I realized. I was about to lose something more important than any building I could ever design. The monitors beeped steadily in the silence that followed. The doctor says you need 4 weeks of rest, Sophia finally said, her voice careful and measured. Will you still be here when I recover? The vulnerability in his question was so unlike him that it caught her off guard. I don't know, she answered honestly, but I'll postpone Florence until we figure this out. 2 days later, against medical advice but with a compromise of strict home rest, Dominic was discharged. Their home, once merely a showcase for his architectural prowess, became a strange new territory, a place where he actually had to live, to be present with nowhere to escape. The first week was awkward. Dominic untethered from his usual frenetic pace was like a caged animal. He paced. He checked his phone compulsively until Sophia eventually hit it. He tried to set up a makeshift drafting table in the living room until she pointedly reminded him of the doctor's orders. I don't know how to do this, he admitted on the 8th day, staring out the window at the city he'd helped shape. I don't know how to just ... be. Neither do we, Sophia replied softly. Be together, I mean, not anymore. Her words hung between them, a truth too heavy to ignore. That afternoon, while Sophia was at the gallery, Dominic found himself drawn to her studio. At the back of the house, he'd rarely entered this space, always respecting it as her domain. Now, he stood surrounded by her work pieces she'd never shown him. Expressions of a soul he'd stopped trying to understand. One sculpture in particular captivated him, a woman, with her arms outstretched, breaking through what appeared to be a glass box. The detail was exquisite, the emotion raw and undeniable. On the base, a single word was carved, finally. When Sophia returned, she found him still there, sitting on the floor beside the sculpture, his face streaked with tears. You're incredibly talented, he said without looking up. Didn't you ever show me these? You never asked, she answered, simply setting down her bag. And after a while, it seemed easier to keep this part of myself separate. Like everything else, he nodded, understanding dawning painfully. I've been thinking about what you said about there not being an us. For a long time, you're right, Sophia leaned against the doorframe, neither entering fully nor retreating. It's not entirely your fault. Most of it is, he countered. I built my career on understanding spaces, how they make people feel, how they facilitate connection or isolation. And yet I created a life where the person I love most felt completely alone. The present tense love not loved hung in the air between them. What do you want, Dominic? Sophia asked, the question encompassing far more than the immediate moment. He looked up at her, his expression more open than she'd seen in years. I want to remember who I was before Foster Designs consumed me. I want to remember who we were. And I want to see if there's anything left worth salvaging. The following days brought a cautious new routine. Mornings on the terrace with coffee and actual conversation. Afternoons where Dominic would read while Sophia worked on new sculptures. Evenings of takeout and documentaries they'd pause frequently to discuss small, ordinary moments that had once been sacrificed on the altar of ambition. In the third week, Dominic asked if he could watch her work. Sitting quietly in the corner of her studio, he observed as she shaped clay with confident hands, bringing formless matter to life. When she glanced over questioningly, he shook his head in wonder. I forgot, he said. Forgot what? How beautiful it is to create something with no deadline, no client, no purpose beyond expression. He hesitated. I used to design that way. Back in school, before everything became about legacy and innovation. That night, after a simple dinner they'd cooked together, Dominic disappeared into his home office, not to work, but to retrieve something. He returned with a dusty portfolio case. I found these while you were at the gallery yesterday, he explained, carefully extracting aged sketches, my early designs. The ones that made you fall in love with my work before you fell in love with me. Sophia recognized them immediately organic structures that embraced rather than dominated their environments, homes designed for living rather than showcasing. Among them was the cottage they'd dreamed of building in Vermont. You kept these? She asked, touching the yellowed paper gently. I could never bring myself to throw them away, even when I convinced myself they were naive, uncommercial. He met her eyes. They represented a different path at one I didn't take. As his medical leave neared its end, the question of what came next loomed large. The separation papers remained unsigned, the Florence acceptance unanswered. The fragile bridge they'd begun to rebuild still felt too delicate to bear the weight of real decisions. On the final evening of his mandated rest, they sat in the garden behind their home space that had been meticulously designed, but rarely used. I called Richard today, Dominic said, naming his second-in-command at Foster Designs. I'm not going back. Not fully, not yet. Sophia turned to him, surprised. What does that mean? It means I'm stepping back to a creative director role. 3 days a week, no client meetings, no international travel for at least 6 months. He took a deep breath. And it means I'm declining the Singapore project. Dominic, that project is everything you've worked for. No, he said firmly. It's everything I convinced myself to work for. There's a difference. He reached for her hand tentatively. I can't undo the last 7 years in 4 weeks, but I can choose a different path forward, if you're willing to see where it leads. Sophia didn't pull away, but her expression remained guarded. And if the Florence residency accepts me, then I'll come visit, he replied without hesitation. Every month. And I'll use the time to rediscover the architect hand, the man I wanted to be before accolades became more important than happiness. As night fell around them, Sophia realized that for the first time in years they were sitting in peaceful silence rather than tense avoidance. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was something they hadn't had in a long time. Possibility. I can't promise anything, she said finally. Dominic nodded, understanding the fragility of this moment. Neither can I accept this. Whatever happens between us, I won't go back to being the man who forgot our anniversary, who forgot what matters. In the gentle darkness of their garden, surrounded by precisely placed flora, neither of them had truly appreciated before. They sat together not as the power couple who graced architectural magazines, but as two people examining the blueprints of what redemption might look like. Asterisk parallel designs. The email arrived on a crisp October morning as Sophia arranged a collection of hand-blown glass pieces for her gallery's upcoming exhibition. Congratulations, it read. We are pleased to inform you that your application for the Florence Contemporary Arts Residency has been accepted. 6 months in Italy. 6 months to explore. Her artistic voice, without the shadow of Dominic's success looming over her. 6 months to discover who Sophia Foster was when she wasn't defined by her marriage to an architectural icon. She sat down heavily on a nearby bench, phone clutched in her hand, emotions swirling like watercolors before they set. Excitement, fear, and something unexpected. Hesitation. 3 weeks had passed since Dominic's collapse. Since the beginning of their tentative reconnection, true to his word, he had returned to Foster Designs on a limited schedule, delegating the Singapore project to his protege, Rebecca Chen. He'd started sketching again, not grand commercial structures, but intimate spaces designed for connection. Twice. He'd surprised Sophia by picking her up from the gallery for impromptu dinners at tiny restaurants where no one recognized him. Small changes. Fragile ones. Good news? Julian asked, noticing her expression as he carefully unwrapped another. Glass sculpture, Florence, she said simply. I got in. Julian's face lit up, then quickly sobered as he registered her lack of enthusiasm. That's what you wanted, right? It was. Sophia stared at the acceptance email. It is, but... She looked up at her friend and assistant. The person who had witnessed her slow disappearance within her marriage and her gradual re-emergence through art. But things have shifted. At home. Julian set down the bubble wrap and joined her on the bench. Shifted how? Is he making promises again? No, not promises exactly, just ... changes. Real ones, I think. She sighed. The timing is just so complicated. Timing is always complicated, Julian replied gently. That's why it's usually an excuse. The question is, what do you actually want, Sophia? What did she want? The question followed her through. The day, through client meetings and installation decisions, through her quiet drive home. When she pulled into their driveway, she noticed something unusual. Dominic's car was already there at 4 p.m. Inside the house was strangely quiet.
Oh.
No Meredith preparing dinner. No NPR playing in the background, as was Dominic's habit when he worked from home. Instead, she found a note on the kitchen counter. Meet me on the roof. Shave Roof Terrace was Dominic's Prid, a perfectly proportioned urban oasis with views of the Manhattan skyline. They'd hosted countless dinner parties there in the early years of their marriage. But lately, it had been used primarily for entertaining clients. As Sophia stepped through the glass doors, she froze in surprise. The space had been transformed. The sleek outdoor furniture had been replaced with comfortable, mismatched pieces reminiscent of their first apartment. String lights crisscrossed overhead, creating a warm glow against the darkening sky. In the center stood Dominic, beside a drafting table, not his usual high-tech workstation, but an old-fashioned wooden one she recognized from his graduate school days. What is all this? She asked, stepping forward. Dominic smiled nervously. I had it in storage. Couldn't bring myself to get rid of it even though it didn't fit the aesthetic anymore. He ran his hand along the worn wood. This is where I designed our first place together. Remember that terrible walk-up in Brooklyn? With the leaky faucet and the neighbor who played cello at midnight? Sophia recalled, smiling despite herself. We were so happy there. We were. Dominic gestured to the papers spread across the table. I've been thinking about why that was. Curious. Sophia moved closer to examine the drawings. Her breath caught as she recognized the lines and curves updated versions of their old Vermont cottage dream. The one they'd abandoned when his career exploded. You redesigned it, she whispered, tracing the elegant simplicity of the structure. It wasn't grand or imposing like his commercial work. Instead, it embraced the landscape, invited nature inside, created spaces for genuine living rather than mere showcasing. I did more than that, Dominic replied, pulling out another set of documents. I bought the land. The original plot we looked at 12 years ago near Stowe. It's been sitting empty all this time. Sophia stared at him, speechless. I'm not asking you to build it with me, he added quickly. I'm not asking you for anything, actually. I just wanted you to know that I'm serious about changing course. Whether or not you decide to give us another chance. Asterisk before she could respond. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a reminder of the email she'd received earlier, of the decision waiting to be made. I got accepted to Florence, she said, watching his face carefully. Something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment, perhaps, but not surprise. Congratulations, he said sincerely. When do you leave? January, if I accept. If. Sophia moved to the edge of the terrace, looking out at the city lights emerging as dusk settled. I applied to Florence because I needed space to find myself. Again, to remember who I am outside of being Mrs. Dominic Foster. And now? He asked, keeping his distance, respecting her space in a way he never would have months ago. Now, I'm not sure if running away is the answer, she admitted, but I'm also not sure if staying is right either. Dominic joined her at the railing, careful to leave a foot of space between them. What if there's a third option, which is go? To Florence, he said, surprising her. Explore your art, find your voice, but don't do it as a separation. Do it as a sabbatical for both of us. Sophia turned to face him fully. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that I stay here and continue the work I've started scaling back at the firm, connecting with why I became an architect in the first place. His voice grew more confident as he continued. And maybe, once a month, I fly to Florence, not to check on you or to impose, but to see the city through your eyes, to experience your world instead of expecting you to live in mine. And what happens after the 6 months? Dominic gestured to the cottage plans. That's up to us to decide. Together. 3 months later, Sophia stood in her sun-drenched studio in Florence, surrounded by half-finished sculptures and canvases. The ancient building that housed the residency program had been a monastery centuries ago, its thick stone walls and arched windows creating a sanctuary for creation. After years of artistic constraint, she was flourishing in this environment, exploring materials and forms she'd never dared attempt in New York. Her phone chimed with a text. It's landing in an hour. Can't wait to see your new work. It would be Dominic's third visit since she'd arrived in Italy. Their first reunion had been tentative, both of them navigating unfamiliar territory, not just the cobblestone streets of Florence, but the new landscape of their relationship. He'd stayed in a nearby hotel, joined her for dinners and museum visits, listened more than he spoke. During his second visit, he'd brought sketches of projects he was developing with a small team of young architects. He'd hired designs that prioritized human experience over monumental statements. They'd spent hours discussing the philosophy behind his new direction. And for the first time in years, Sophia had felt like a true partner in his creative process rather than a spectator. Now, as she prepared for his third visit, she realized something had shifted within her as well. The anger that had fueled her decision to apply for the residency had mellowed into something more nuanced. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. In the space and freedom of Florence, she discovered that her art wasn't just an escape from her marriage. It was an essential part of who she was, who she'd always been. When Dominic appeared in the doorway of her studio that afternoon, his face tanned from the Italian winter sun. She felt neither the resentment of recent years nor the desperate attachment of their early relationship. Instead, she experienced something new, the simple joy of seeing someone she cared for deeply. This space suits you, he said, taking in the organized chaos of her studio so different from the pristine environments he'd always created. It's alive. Feels right, she agreed, wiping clay from her hands. How was your flight? Long worth it. We set down his bag and pulled out a slim portfolio. I brought something to show you, if you're interested. It was a series of photographs there. Brownstone in New York, transformed. Gone were the austere design elements and showroom perfection. Instead, warm textiles and personal mementos now filled the spaces. Her artwork, previously confined to her private studio, now hung prominently throughout. Most surprising was his office. The commanding mahogany desk replaced by a simpler wooden table positioned to face the garden rather than the city view. You've been redecorating, she observed, studying the images. Redesigning, he corrected. Creating a home instead of a statement. The last photo made her pause. It was the empty Vermont land he'd purchased, now marked with simple wooden stakes outlining the footprint of the cottage he'd redesigned. You're building it? She asked. Not yet, he replied. That's a decision we would make together. If there's still a we after your residency ends. Sophia set down the photos, a question forming that she'd been avoiding for months. And if I decide to stay in Florence, or go somewhere else entirely? Dominic met her gaze steadily. Then I'll respect that choice. The person I was before wouldn't. have the person I'm trying to become can. That evening, they walked through the Bobley Gardens as the setting sun gilded the Renaissance sculptures and cypress trees. They talked about her latest installation, about the mentorship program he'd started for architects from underserved communities, about the books they'd read and the thoughts they'd had separate lives running on parallel tracks occasionally, converging. "I've been thinking about your cottage designs," Sophia said as they sat on a stone bench overlooking the city. "They're beautiful, but they're still your vision." Dominic nodded, understanding her unspoken concern. "You're right. I fell back into old patterns, trying to solve everything myself instead of creating together. What if?" She hesitated, then continued more confidently. "What if we designed it together, not just as an architect and consultant, but as true collaborators? Your structural expertise with my artistic perspective?" The smile that spread across his face held none of the arrogance that had once been his signature. Instead, it was filled with genuine delight at the possibility. "I'd like that," he said simply. As they walked back to her apartment in comfortable silence, Sophia realized they were creating something entirely new, not a restoration of what was, but a thoughtful design for what could be. Two independent lives with intentional points of intersection. Parallel lines that, against all mathematical odds, might somehow meet. That night, for the first time since before his collapse, Dominic stayed at her apartment rather than his hotel, not in a rush to reclaim intimacy, but in recognition of the gradual rebuilding of trust. As they lay in separate beds in the two-bedroom flat, connected by an open door and quiet conversation that stretched into the early hours, Sophia felt neither trapped nor abandoned. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the freedom to choose this relationship rather than endure it. The space to grow separately while still growing toward each other. The possibility that parallel designs might, with careful intention, create something stronger and more beautiful than either could achieve alone. The architecture of second chances 1 year later, snowflakes drifted lazily outside the large picture window of the Vermont cottage. It's not the grand statement of their former Manhattan brownstone, nor a rustic cliché, but something uniquely theirs. Seamless blend of Dominic's architectural precision and Sophia's artistic soul. Sophia stood at her easel in the studio space they'd designed together, capturing the winter landscape in bold strokes. The wall between her workspace and Dominic's drafting area remained half-height by mutual agreement, allowing them to work independently while still sharing occasional glances and ideas. "Tea." Dominic appeared beside her, 2 steaming mugs in. Hand at 43, the driven CEO had given way to a more contemplative architect. He now led a small selective practice focused on sustainable community spaces, while Sophia's sculptures had gained recognition following her successful Florence exhibition. "Perfect timing," she smiled, setting down her brush. "I was just finishing." They moved to the window seat, her design, his execution, that overlooked the frozen pond and snow-laden trees. This had become their ritual. Afternoons of separate work followed by shared moments of reflection. "I got the email from the Venice Biennale," Sophia said quietly. "They want both of us. Your pavilion design and my installation series." Dominic's eyes widened. "Together?" "Together," she confirmed. "But it would mean 6 months of intense collaboration. Are we ready for that?" He considered the question seriously, respecting its weight. They'd learned to navigate their relationship deliberately, no longer taking anything for granted. "We are," he finally replied. "We're not the same people who broke each other." Sophia leaned against him, her head finding the familiar spot on his shoulder.
Oh.
Their journey from fractured foundation to this peaceful coexistence hadn't been linear. There had been setbacks, his occasional slips into workaholic patterns, her moments of lingering resentment. But unlike before, they faced these challenges with open communication rather than silent endurance. "You know what I realized yesterday?" Sophia said, watching the snow transform their world into a blank canvas. "For the first time in our marriage, I'm not waiting anymore." "Waiting for what?" "For you to notice me. For our real life to begin. For things to get better." She turned to meet his gaze. "I'm just living." present in each moment, whether you're here or not. And that makes the moments when you are here so much richer. Dominic took her hand, his thumb tracing the paint stains on her fingers. And I'm not building monuments anymore, he said. Just homes, spaces for living, not legacies. As twilight painted the snow in shades of lavender and gold, they sat in comfortable silence to artists whose greatest collaboration wasn't the cottage around them or the prestigious commission they'd accepted, but the careful, intentional architecture of their second chance.